Walk outside and you can feel it in the air. A kind of dullness, not just distraction, but engineered stupidity. Reports from the Center for Male Psychology in 2024 and 2025 argue that society today isn't merely tolerating ignorance, it's actively cultivating it. People aren't just uninformed, they're being conditioned to remain uninformed, passive, and compliant. This isn't an accident, it's a design. Consider the latest American Psychological Association study from early 2025. The average person's attention span online has collapsed to just 47 seconds before they switch tasks. 47 seconds, barely enough time to think a complete thought. But think about who benefits from this erosion. If your mind can't hold focus, you can't question power. If you can't sit with discomfort, you won't challenge authority. Nietzsche would call it the herd instinct, a pressure to blend, to stop asking why, to graze silently while shepherds lead you. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, writing about Nazi Germany, warned that stupidity is more dangerous than malice. Evil, he said, can be confronted and resisted, but stupidity is immune to reason. Today his warning feels prophetic. It isn't just that individuals are stupid, it's that stupidity has become a social force, a collective phenomenon. People act ignorant not because they are, but because it's easier, safer, and socially rewarded. And look at the cultural programming around you. Schools cutting critical thinking from curricula in the name of efficiency, as critiques of Project 2025 and DPI education standards highlight. Corporate media manufacturing shallow outrage cycles that last a day, then vanish. Algorithms spoon-feeding you the same safe loops, ensuring your brain never wrestles with contradiction. What Foucault would call the discipline of knowledge, power shaping what you're even allowed to think about, now lives in your pocket, buzzing every few minutes with a distraction disguised as connection. We know from Asch's conformity experiments that most people will deny the evidence of their own eyes just to avoid standing out. In Milgram's studies, ordinary people obeyed orders to deliver what they believed were lethal shocks, simply because an authority told them to. Today, the machinery of control doesn't even need a man in a lab coat. It's diffuse. It's woven into screens, into policies, into consumerism. Schopenhauer once said people often feign ignorance to dodge truth they find inconvenient. Modern society makes that feigned ignorance the default state of being. So ask yourself, if stupidity is more profitable than intelligence, if obedience is more useful than independence, what would stop those in power from manufacturing stupidity itself? And if that's true, then the epidemic you see around you isn't a coincidence. It's a strategy. The question is, how deep does the design go? If stupidity were just an accident of poor education or personal laziness, it would be tragic but harmless. But it's not. It's systemic. It's cultivated because it serves. Power thrives when people can't think for themselves. Foucault taught us that knowledge and power are inseparable. The ability to shape what people know is the ability to control how they live. Control the narrative, and you control the masses. That's not conspiracy theory, that's sociology. Take Chomsky's idea of manufacturing consent. He showed how media doesn't simply inform, it frames, filters, and massages reality so that the population consents to policies against its own interests. Today, this process has mutated into algorithmic propaganda. In 2025, the Anti-Defamation League reported how misinformation networks increasingly exploit pluralistic ignorance, where people stay silent, believing they're alone in dissent, while everyone else is staying silent for the same reason. The result? A population that thinks resistance is rare, when in fact resistance is everywhere but muted. That silence becomes obedience. Look at the education systems under pressure from Project 2025's ideological revisions and new DPI standards. Critical analysis is being stripped out, replaced with standardized compliance. Students learn to memorize and regurgitate, not to critique and create. It's the same disciplinary logic Foucault described in prisons, factories, and barracks. Make people docile, predictable, and easy to manage. What happens when schools function more like training grounds for obedience than engines of thought? You get adults who follow orders without question, Milgram's volunteers on a societal scale. But the weaponization of stupidity doesn't stop at classrooms or news feeds. Consumerism plays its part. Taoist philosophy tells us that simplicity and clarity breed wisdom, But modern consumerism thrives on noise and desire. Every advertisement whispers, don't reflect, don't doubt, just buy. Buy to distract yourself from meaninglessness, buy to fill the void. And the more you consume, the less time you have to think. It's a deliberate trap, nihilism packaged with a receipt. And here's the darker truth. Stupidity becomes profitable. Ignorant consumers buy more, misinformed citizens question less, obedient workers accept exploitation. The economy and political order both demand that you stay docile. In Nietzsche's terms, this is slave morality reborn, praising obedience, humility, and mediocrity while punishing independence as arrogance. Intelligence becomes rebellion. Stupidity becomes virtue. So you have to wonder, what happens when ignorance is no longer a weakness, but the very currency of society? Who gets rich from keeping you stupid? And more importantly, what happens to the ones who dare to resist? Imagine being in a room, hearing another human scream in pain, and still pressing the button that you're told will deliver more shocks. That was Milgram's experiment in the 1960s, and over 65% of participants obeyed to the end. Ordinary people, transformed into executioners by nothing more than an authoritative voice. Now realize, society has recreated that experiment on a global scale. The lab coat has been replaced by institutions, screens, and social norms. The shock machine? It's everywhere, policies, trends, markets, and we keep pressing the button. This is where stupidity becomes functional. Blind obedience needs dull minds. If people pause to ask why, the system collapses. Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment went even further. College kids given roles slipped into cruelty almost immediately. Ordinary students became jailers. The mask of civilization is paper thin, and all it takes to activate atrocity is obedience plus stupidity. No wonder elites want it mass-produced, and they've perfected the tools. The APA's 2025 findings on attention span aren't just data points, they're symptoms of a deeper design. By fragmenting focus into 47-second bursts, society breeds minds that can't sustain moral questioning. Can you process the ethics of drone warfare, systemic inequality, or surveillance capitalism in under a minute? Of course not. But you can process an ad, you can process a trend, you can process a command. Pluralistic ignorance fuels the machine further. People conform, not because they agree, but because they assume everyone else does. Asch showed us this with lines on paper. Participants literally denied what their eyes saw just to align with the group. Now amplify that by billions networked on social media. You might hate the stupidity, but you scroll silently, afraid to stand out. Everyone's faking it, and the silence becomes complicity. A perfect feedback loop. Obedience sustained by stupidity, stupidity sustained by obedience. Foucault called it disciplinary society, where power doesn't always punish you directly, but normalizes you until you police yourself. You don't need a tyrant when you've got neighbors, co-workers, algorithms all nudging you to stay in line. That is the obedience machine. Self-regulating, self-sustaining, invisible. So ask yourself, if humanity has already proven it will obey authority even to the point of atrocity, what happens when authority engineers not just obedience, but stupidity itself? What kind of atrocities are being prepared right now in silence under the comfort of ignorance? And more chillingly, will you even notice when they arrive? Walk into a supermarket, and you'll see thousands of items screaming for your attention. Walk into a mall, and you'll be surrounded by glowing screens, artificial music, artificial scents. None of it exists to nourish your soul. It exists to keep you sedated. Consumerism is not neutral. It's a philosophy disguised as convenience. And its philosophy is nihilism, the belief that life has no inherent meaning, so you might as well consume endlessly to distract yourself from the void. Taoist writings spoke of simplicity as the path to wisdom, cutting away the noise to find the natural flow of life. Contrast that with modern consumer society, where every waking moment is invaded by noise designed to erode reflection. You're not meant to sit in silence. You're not meant to contemplate the mystery of being. You're meant to scroll, to purchase, to chase trends that dissolve in weeks. The moral motives framework in modern psychology reveals how consumer marketing hijacks fundamental human drives, belonging, safety, even moral identity, and redirects them toward buying things. Stupidity becomes survival. Ignorance becomes lifestyle. Schopenhauer saw through this trick centuries ago. He argued that people feign ignorance not because they don't know, but because they don't want to know. Today, consumer culture offers you that ignorance on a silver platter. Don't ask where your phone was made. Don't ask why your food tastes like chemicals. Don't ask who profits when you drown in debt. Just swipe, just click, just treat yourself. This isn't freedom. This is bondage through distraction. Project 2025's education critiques warn about dumbing down standards for the sake of efficiency, but consumerism has been doing the same for decades. Every purchase is an instruction. Stop thinking, start consuming. The ADL's 2025 report on misinformation shows that consumer-driven platforms amplify falsehoods more than truths, because lies generate more clicks, and clicks generate profit. Ignorance has been monetized. And the elites understand this perfectly. A thinking population is dangerous, but a consuming population is docile. Nietzsche described this as herd mentality. Don't stand out, don't resist. Just follow the crowd to the checkout line. What looks like choice is actually compulsion. The shelves are endless, but the path is narrow. Work, spend, repeat. That's not freedom. That's the cage of nihilism, dressed up in neon. So here's the question. If consumerism has replaced meaning with merchandise, if stupidity has been repackaged as lifestyle, then what happens to the individual who refuses to buy? What punishment awaits the one who says no to the herd? Imagine you're sitting in a room with 10 other people. A simple question is asked, which line is longer? The answer is obvious, yet one by one the group gives the wrong response. When it's your turn, do you resist or do you conform? Solomon Asch ran this experiment in the 1950s, and the results were chilling. 3 out of 4 people conformed at least once, even when the truth was right before their eyes. Not because they believed the lie, but because the pressure to fit in was overwhelming. Now take that experiment and scale it to society. That's where we are today. Pluralistic ignorance magnifies this effect. You don't speak up because you think you're alone, not realizing everyone else feels the same silence. The ADL's 2025 research shows how disinformation networks exploit this dynamic, manufacturing false consensus online so dissenters feel isolated. You think the stupidity is universal, when in fact, the silence is the real epidemic. The cost of truth is social exile, so stupidity becomes a mask we all wear. Bonhoeffer called this the most dangerous form of stupidity, not individual ignorance, but collective stupidity, which resists reason itself. It's easier to laugh at a joke you know is cruel than to face the group's disapproval. It's easier to nod along with a narrative you suspect is false than to risk being labeled a crank. Stupidity here isn't lack of intelligence, it's self-preservation turned toxic. And conformity doesn't just protect, it corrodes. Zimbardo's prison experiment showed that ordinary students, when given roles and group reinforcement, embraced cruelty they never thought themselves capable of. That's the horror of conformity. It doesn't just silence you, it reshapes you. You become the mask you wear. You feign ignorance long enough and it becomes genuine. Modern digital life turbocharges this. The Microsoft 2025 survey revealed that people are increasingly outsourcing memory and reasoning to AI tools, treating their own cognition as optional. Why wrestle with complexity if you can just parrot the algorithm's answer? Why resist conformity when the feed rewards obedience with likes and punishes dissent with cancellation? The line between thinking and following blurs until it disappears. So the question becomes, what happens when entire societies conform to stupidity, not because they believe it, but because they fear standing alone? If silence is obedience, and obedience is stupidity, then we're not just living in a herd, we're living in a herd walking toward a cliff. The real shock is this: who will break the silence before we fall? If stupidity feels like an accident, it's only because the architects of society have hidden the scaffolding. The truth is, stupidity is profitable. It's useful. It's engineered. Who benefits when you can't focus for more than 47 seconds? Advertisers. Who gains when schools produce obedient test takers instead of critical thinkers? Politicians and corporations. Who thrives when conformity silences dissent? Every elite institution built on exploitation. Stupidity isn't a glitch in the system. It's the operating system. Chomsky's manufacturing consent showed us how media frames narratives so that people willingly agree to their own subjugation. In 2025, this isn't just the news cycle, it's algorithmic curation on platforms that decide what you see, what you don't, and what you think is normal. Microsoft's 2025 global survey revealed that over half of respondents now rely on AI tools to think for them in daily tasks. Cognitive outsourcing. That means elites don't even need to censor, they just need to flood you with enough noise and convenience that independent thought feels unnecessary. Stupidity outsourced. Obedience automated. Nietzsche's herd morality thrives here. Independence is rebranded as arrogance. Doubt becomes disloyalty. The masses are trained to see submission as virtue, compliance as strength. It's the same mechanism Bonhoeffer warned about, stupidity as a social contagion. Not a lack of intelligence, but a refusal to use it. And when that refusal is rewarded with comfort, promotions, and belonging, it becomes irresistible. Consumerism adds the sugarcoating. The moral motives framework reveals how marketing exploits your deepest values, family, community, justice, and converts them into transactions. Buy this to be a good parent. Buy that to show you care. You think you're exercising free will, but your choices were designed in boardrooms. Elites don't care if you're smart enough to question the products. They only need you to be stupid enough to keep consuming. Even education reforms reinforce the blueprint. Critics of Project 2025 highlight how DPI standards quietly strip away critical thinking curricula under the guise of efficiency. Less philosophy, more job-ready skills. Less history, more compliance training. Knowledge is narrowed, reflection sterilized. That isn't an accident. That's the blueprint. Dumbed-down citizens who obey, consume, and never revolt. So here's the nightmare. What if the stupidity epidemic isn't a byproduct of modern life, but the plan all along? What if every distraction, every standardized test, every hollow advertisement isn't just noise, but the careful construction of a society too stupid to rebel? And the darker question, if that's true, then what role are you playing in their design? History makes one thing brutally clear. Stupidity plus obedience is a recipe for horror. Milgram's subjects pressed the shock button because an authority told them to. Zimbardo's students abused prisoners because a role gave them permission. Scale that dynamic up, and you have genocides, wars, and bureaucratic cruelties where ordinary people become instruments of evil without ever believing themselves evil. Bonhoeffer saw it firsthand under the Nazis. He wrote that stupidity was more dangerous than malice, because the stupid person does not recognize truth when it's presented. They are immune to reason, and that immunity is precisely what allows atrocities to unfold in silence. Now look around. The ADL's 2025 report outlines how disinformation campaigns radicalize populations by creating false consensus, making people believe everyone agrees with extreme positions. Pluralistic ignorance then locks it in. Each individual, doubtful inside, remains silent, convinced they're the outlier. The atrocity pipeline doesn't need guns in the street. It only needs silence, conformity, and the dulling of thought. In that silence, cruelty breeds. The mechanism is shockingly simple. First, reduce attention spans, as the APA showed. 47 seconds of focus means no sustained moral reflection. Then, replace education with obedience training. Add consumer distractions to erode inner life. Flood social media with curated propaganda until dissent looks like madness. Finally, let conformity do the rest. No dictators required, just the invisible machinery of stupidity, humming along while people scroll. Schopenhauer warned that ignorance is often feigned to avoid uncomfortable truths. But in our time, ignorance isn't feigned, it's engineered. People wear it like armor, because seeing clearly would mean standing against the tide. And in that willful blindness, atrocities take root. Small ones first, silencing voices, mocking dissent, punishing thought. But history shows where it leads. The same obedience that makes you accept an unjust policy today can make you complicit in horrors tomorrow. The Stanford prison experiment was stopped after 6 days. Real societies don't stop. They drift into cruelty step by step, with ordinary people telling themselves they're just following rules. The atrocity pipeline doesn't announce itself. It feels normal until it's irreversible. So ask yourself, if stupidity is being mass-produced, if obedience is the default, what kinds of atrocities are already being prepared under the surface of everyday life? And worse, when they arrive, will you recognize them, or will you be too distracted, too conformist, too stupid to see? We live in a paradox. Humanity has never had more access to information, yet thought has never been so shallow. The Microsoft 2025 survey showed that over 55% of people now rely on AI not as a tool, but as a substitute for thinking. Offloading memory, reasoning, even judgment. That convenience is intoxicating, but it corrodes. When you stop exercising your mind, it atrophies. When you stop questioning, you forget how. Society is drifting into what Schopenhauer called feigned ignorance. Except now it isn't feigned, it's institutionalized. Education should be the antidote. Instead, Project 2025's restructured DPI standards reduce classrooms to obedience drills. Inquiry-based learning, the method proven to build critical resilience, is being stripped away. A 2025 Frontiers in Education paper on neurodidactics demonstrates how engagement with uncertainty, debate, and struggle literally rewires the brain for intelligence. But instead of nurturing that, schools are pruning it out. Less complexity, more standardized obedience. Students don't leave school smarter, they leave school trained to consume, conform, and comply. And look at media consumption. The APA's 47-second attention span statistic isn't just about distraction, it's about disintegration. The human brain requires depth to form understanding. Strip that away, and you create what Nietzsche warned about, a herd that never asks why. Consumerism fills the void with shallow pleasures, like a carnival that never ends, where no one notices the rides are broken. Taoist clarity, sitting in silence, recognizing the flow of nature, is replaced with endless noise. Society doesn't want you wise, it wants you entertained, addicted, and numb. Even moral outrage has been commodified. Scroll through social media and you'll see choreographed cycles of anger, each one burning out in a day. Manufactured outrage is perfect. It lets you feel righteous without changing anything. As Chomsky argued, propaganda isn't only about lies, it's about shaping what you care about. And in 2025, your cares are rented out in 47-second slots to advertisers, politicians, and influencers. The collapse of thought isn't just intellectual, it's existential. Stupidity becomes not just a flaw, but an identity. People cling to ignorance because truth would shatter their fragile illusions, and so stupidity becomes sacred, protected, even celebrated. So the question is this: if stupidity has become the foundation of our schools, our media, our technology, our culture, then what happens when the collapse is complete? When society has lost the capacity to think at all? Will rebellion still be possible, or will even the idea of rebellion vanish into silence? If stupidity is engineered, obedience manufactured, and thought collapsing, then the obvious question is there a way out? Or are we locked into a future where intelligence itself becomes rebellion, and rebellion is crushed before it can spark? History suggests otherwise. Systems built on obedience always overreach. The pressure to conform creates cracks, and in those cracks resistance grows. Science shows us where the cracks can widen. Neurodidactic research published in Frontiers in Education in 2025 proves that inquiry-based learning, forcing the brain to wrestle with uncertainty, to generate questions rather than memorize answers, literally strengthens neural pathways tied to intelligence and resilience. The opposite of stupidity isn't just knowledge, it's curiosity. A mind trained to ask why cannot be fully domesticated. That's why critical thinking is being stripped away. It's dangerous to power, which means practicing it is the most subversive act you can commit. Bonhoeffer believed stupidity was more dangerous than malice, but he also believed it could be resisted through action. Not preaching to the herd, but living as proof that stupidity is not inevitable. Nietzsche would agree. The herd is powerful, but the individual who dares to stand apart is the one who reshapes destiny. To think for yourself is to place a stone in the gears of the obedience machine. To speak the truth, others only whisper, is to shatter pluralistic ignorance, reminding people they are not alone. Silence feeds stupidity, voice breaks it. Modern psychology offers tools. Studies on misinformation resilience show that those trained in pre-bunking, anticipating propaganda tricks before encountering them, are far less likely to fall prey. Inquiry-based education, long-form reading, focused attention practices all rebuild cognitive endurance in a world that wants it dissolved into 47-second fragments. Taoist traditions remind us that clarity begins with stillness, withdrawing from noise to see what is real. Resistance isn't only protest, It's cultivating a mind that cannot be easily manipulated. So here's the brutal truth. Society does want you stupid, because stupidity is safe, profitable, and easy to rule. But stupidity is not destiny. Intelligence is rebellion. Curiosity is resistance. And the most radical thing you can do in an age of manufactured ignorance, think deeply for yourself. The question isn't whether the system wants you stupid. It does. The real question is, will you obey, or will you break the spell?